Well, now Trump needs to call Elon Musk. Their relationship has been strained for some time, so calmly and quietly explain, come to your senses.
Russian propagandist Vladimir Solovyov in his studio threatens Elon Musk that bloggers have reported a mass shutdown of Starlink terminals used by Russian forces in Ukraine. Well, of course, when you have the second largest army in the world, a nuclear state without equal, the most logical solution is to ask Trump to call an American businessman and request internet access. An empire that cannot fight without Wi-Fi is no longer geopolitics. It's stand-up comedy. What's especially amusing is the tone. Not we will provide our own communications. Not we have our own technology. But well, Trump, tell Musk to turn it on. It's less a general staff, more a help desk. Hello, our button isn't work. Can you switch it back? A great power dependent on someone else's router. That, of course, deserves a whole new chapter in their textbooks.
But what would happen if we were to strike the factories that produce Starlink?
At this moment, Solovyov did something usually carefully hidden. He voiced a vulnerability out loud. Not the enemy's, his own. When a propagandist of a nuclear state talks about a disabled Starlink as a catastrophe and suggests striking the factories, it only means one thing. Without foreign technology, their system doesn't work. These Russian propagandists need to understand one simple fact. Starlink is not a gadget. It is 21st century infrastructure, communications, command, coordination. And if its absence causes such hysteria in Russia, then all talk about a sovereign internet, import substitution, and a technological leap was just noise for domestic consumption. The idea of striking the factories is especially telling. That's not how the strong think. That's how those think who have had their crutch taken away and suddenly can't move without pain. The strong would say, we have alternatives. The weak say, let's destroy what we cannot live without. There is one more point Russia seems not to grasp. Threatening a private American company is not bravado. It's an automatic admission that they have gone beyond rational calculation. It's a signal not to the West, but to everyone. Russia does not control escalation, even in words. The result is a simple and humiliating picture. A country that for years has intimidated the world with missiles is in reality dependent on the decision of one person and one button. So yes, it's funny, but this laughter is not light. It's laughter at how the myth of a great technological power crumbles live on air without strikes, without war, simply because the internet is gone.
And what if we were to strike in outer space?
Not about technology, not about development, not about alternatives, not about what Russia can actually build or create. Only one thing remains. What else can be broken? This is a highly revealing moment. This is not how strength speaks. This is how emptiness speaks. When a state has a future, it articulates it. Orbits, systems, projects, timelines stretching years ahead. When there is no future, fantasies of explosions take over. Because destruction requires no competence. It does not need engineers, universities, or an economy. It requires only anger and a microphone.
It's indiscriminate, so of course our own satellites would burn as well. And to hell with them.
The phrase, our satellites will burn too, well, screw them, sounds like pure capitulation disguised as bravado. This is the moment when they themselves admit their own strategic assets hold no value. Not because they are unnecessary, but because they cannot manage them and have no intention of thinking ahead. This is not the voice of someone in control. This is the voice of someone ready to strike themselves just to create the illusion of decisiveness. It's the logic of a scorched field turned inward against their own infrastructure, the remnants of their technological base, their future. What's particularly telling is how easily this is said. In their rhetoric, satellites are expendable, just statistics. noise, not a word about restoration, consequences, vulnerabilities, because acknowledging value would mean acknowledging responsibility, and responsibility is a chronic problem for them. In practice, this is an admission. If the choice is between control and chaos, they choose chaos. Between calculation and hysteria, they choose hysteria. Between long-term strategy and a TV effect, they choose the effect. And here, all the pomp about strength disappears. The picture that remains is simple. People who do not value their own assets are incapable of protecting either them or their country. And the phrase, well, screw them, this is not about strength. It's about a complete lack of accountability for consequences that someone else will have to clean up. This is what Russian propagandists are really saying. Let's listen closely.
If they introduce whitelists for those Starlinks, then all of our terminals will be switched off. How does a tank operate on the front line right now, for example? There's a small Starlink mounted on the tank. It costs about 35,000 rubles at the moment. It's installed on every tank. Through that Starlink, the guys operating the tank go online. On a tablet or a phone, they receive a live video feed from a Mavic drone that's flying high above. And they fire from the tank while seeing in real time where the shells are landing. Fire correction. God level.
So the entire high-tech war collapses not because of enemy strikes, but because of an excess setting change, not from a breakthrough in defense, but from a whitelist. This is not a technological leap, it's a technological loan suddenly called in. And the cherry on top, they themselves admit they fight with eyes, brains and communications that don't belong to them. Which means that when the connection disappears, so does the God-level coordination. What remains is an old, blind, deaf tank, exactly from the era they so love to use to scare the world.
If all of this collapses, then we roll back, for example, to the previous century in terms of interaction with drones.
Rolling back to the past century, it sounds as if they ever actually left it. What rolled back when the entire setup depended on someone else's internet, Chinese drones, and store-bought tablets, especially ironic against all the talk of traditional values and a special path. Yes, special communications from the US, drones from China, navigation via satellites they don't own, and when all of this is turned off, they suddenly realize that the past century isn't a metaphor, it's the default setting. Paper maps, voice-only communication, aiming by eye. Classic nostalgia, the sacred ties. So the joke is simple and brutal. Russia isn't rolling back to the past century. It was just occasionally peeking into the present, and now it's very upset that the window was closed. Serhiy Flash-Beskresnov, advisor to Ukrainian's Minister of Defense on technological issues, wrote on February 5th that the adversary is facing not just a problem but a catastrophe on the front lines. Command and control have completely collapsed. Assault operations have been halted in many areas. On our side, it turned out that there were issues among those who failed to promptly submit lists of private Starlink terminals. The processing is ongoing, he noted. In early February, Mikhailo Fedorov announced a decision to re-register all Starlink terminals operating in the country in order to create a whitelist of authorized devices and disable all others. Fedorov emphasized that this step was a direct response to Russia's use of Starlink. According to him, the Russian army had begun installing Starlink terminals on long-range drones to conduct strikes against targets inside Ukraine. Introducing a whitelist, he stressed, was the only viable technical solution to counter this tactic. Serhiy Starnenko, advisor to the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, added that following the mass shutdown of Starlink, Russian units would face serious command and control problems at the tactical level, while the Ukrainian armed forces would be able to regain their advantage in communications. Modern warfare is not about tanks or manpower. It is about communication, rapid decision-making, and synchronization. When communication disappears, the army as a system ceases to function. It does not collapse physically immediately, but it loses the ability to act coherently, meaning it cannot advance, maneuver, or adapt quickly. The fact that this led to a halt in assault operations illustrates a simple point. The Russians had no plan for autonomous operations. They were effectively fighting in online mode. When the network went down, there was no offline mode to fall back on. The key difference here is not Starlink itself, but control. The Ukrainian side controls the environment, sets access rules, and can quickly restore order even amid internal disruptions. The Russians rely on whatever happens to work at the moment and have no mechanisms to respond when it stops. Ukraine is taking all measures to restrict Russian military capabilities as much as possible, including through strikes on targets inside the Russian Federation. In this context, information has emerged that the FP5 Flamingo missile successfully struck a target at the Kapustin Yar training ground from where Russia launches the Oreshnik system. This marks the first official announcement of the combat use of the FP5 Flamingo cruise missile and concerns a highly protected facility. The Ukrainian Flamingo, developed by 5 Point, has its first confirmed operational deployment by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Defense Express indicate that the strikes took place during January 2026 and the target was a complex of structures involved in the preparation of intercontinental and medium-range missile launches, the Oreshnik. The exact hangar-type building complex that was struck has not been disclosed, but illustrated photos show the so-called 105th site of the force central inter-service missile training ground of the Russian Federation, Kapustin Yar. High-resolution satellite imagery confirms damage to a boiler facility at the site. However, the level of destruction is lower than would be expected from the 1,000 kilograms warhead reportedly carried by the FP5 Flamingo. Using publicly available satellite imagery from the European Space Agency, it is also possible to observe the effects of the strike on another, even more notable target, the so-called 28th site. This facility has historically served as an assembly and testing base, and during the Soviet era was used for work on the RSD-10 Pioneer intermediate range ballistic missile, the modern incarnation of which is the Oreshnik system. A comparison of available imagery between January 23rd and February 2nd confirms that a fairly powerful strike hit this site, leaving a visible mark. However, the images are of low resolution and weather conditions and visibility over the testing range were poor. Therefore, a more accurate assessment will require higher quality imagery. That said, if the crater is located near the center of the image, it could correspond to the FP5 Flamingo warhead, which weighs approximately 1 ton. A high-resolution satellite image from April 2025 is also provided to help assess the possible impact location. The strike itself may well have occurred on the night of January 27th to 28, as several specialized Telegram channels hinted at the launch of the FP5 Flamingo, while air raid alerts were reported in Russia's Astrakhan region, where the Kapustin Yar range is located. It is therefore important to assess the ability of the FP5 cruise missile, along with other Ukrainian strike assets, to successfully penetrate Russia's air defense system in order to attack this military facility, whose protection was expected to be among the most robust that the Russian Federation could deploy. The irony is that the Russians like to label their facilities as strategic or unique, yet in practice are properly guided missile or UAVs enough to neutralize their so-called super launch sites. There is nothing magical about the Oreshnik, nothing invincible. This once again underscores a key point. In modern warfare, the pompous name or branding of a weapon system matters far less than the operational system behind it. Command and control, precision and adaptability. For the Russians, this remains a serious deficiency. They create the appearance of strength, but actually controlling it is a challenge even for themselves. That's all for today. Thanks for watching this video. Support Ukraine, like and subscribe.